Margaret O'Sullivan clutched her worn leather satchel as the wagon train creaked to a halt outside Fort Laramie. Dust swirled around her blue calico dress, the same one she had worn when she left Boston 3 months ago. Perfectly pinned, now escaped in wild strands around her freckled face. The journey west had been nothing like the romantic adventure the newspaper advertisements had promised. She was one of 43 mail-order brides making their way to the Wyoming Territory, where lonely ranchers and miners waited with marriage contracts already signed. Margaret's future husband, Harold Brennan, owned a cattle ranch near Devil's Creek. His letters had been polite but cold, describing his property and livestock more than himself. Still, it was better than staying in Boston, where her father's debts had left the family with nothing. The wagon master, a grizzled man named Pete Collins, helped her down from the wooden seat. "This here's Fort Laramie, miss. You'll be staying overnight before the final stretch to Devil's Creek." He pointed toward a collection of wooden buildings surrounded by a tall fence. "Keep close to the other ladies. St. Boston and the frontier don't forgive mistakes." Margaret nodded, following the other women toward the fort's gates. As they walked, she noticed a group of Native American men on horseback watching from a nearby hill. Their presence made some of the other brides nervous, but Margaret found herself curious rather than frightened. She had read about the various tribes in her father's old books, though she knew those accounts were often wrong or incomplete. Inside the fort, the women were given a small barracks room to share. Margaret spread her blanket on a hard wooden bunk and tried to imagine what her life would be like in just 2 more days. Harold's ranch was supposed to be prosperous, with a large house and several hired hands. She would finally have security, even if love seemed unlikely. That evening, as Margaret walked near the fort's trading post, she overheard 2 soldiers talking in hushed voices. "The Lakota have been restless lately," one said. "Chief Redhawk's son has been seen scouting around here, named Swift Eagle, and he's trouble. Smart as a whip and twice as dangerous." "Why don't they just move him to a reservation like the others?" the second soldier asked. "Can't catch him. He knows this land better than we know our own names. Besides, he's got followers. Young warriors who still believe they can fight back against what's coming." Margaret listened carefully. Wondering about this Swift Eagle, the soldiers made him sound like some kind of outlaw. But she sensed there was more to the story. Her father had always taught her to question what people in power said about those they wanted to control. The next morning brought unexpected trouble. One of the wagon wheels had cracked during the night, and Pete Collins announced they would need an extra day to fix it. Some of the brides complained loudly, worried about keeping their future husbands waiting. Margaret didn't mind the delay. Each extra day meant one less day as Harold Brennan's wife. She spent the morning exploring the trading post. Fascinated by the mixture of cultures she saw there, mountain men in buckskins traded alongside Mexican vaqueros and French trappers. She watched Native American women selling beautiful beadwork and wondered what their lives were really like. Beyond the scary stories she had heard, around midday, Margaret decided to walk outside the fort's walls, despite Pete Collins's warnings. She needed some time alone to think, away from the chatter of the other women. She found a quiet spot by a small creek where cottonwood trees provided shade from the hot Wyoming sun. She was sitting on a fallen log, writing in her diary, when she heard a horse approaching. Looking up, she saw a Native American man riding toward her. He was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with long black hair and strong features. He wore traditional clothing mixed with some white man's items, a leather vest over a cotton shirt, and beaded moccasins. Margaret's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. The man dismounted and approached slowly, his hands visible and empty. When he spoke, his English was clear and educated, surprising her. "You should not be out here alone," he said, his dark eyes serious. "It is not safe for someone like you." "Someone like me?" Margaret asked, standing up but not backing away. "A woman who thinks she can understand this land in a single afternoon," he replied, but there was no meanness in his voice. "You are one of the brides, yes? Going to marry a rancher near Devil's Creek?" Margaret nodded, studying his face. Something about him seemed familiar, though she was certain they had never met. "How did you know that?" "Shh. Word travels fast in this territory. There are not many secrets." He paused, looking at the diary in her hands. "You can read and write?" course I can everyone? As soon as the words left her mouth, Margaret realized how naive they sounded. The man smiled slightly, the first warmth she had seen in his expression. Not everyone has been as fortunate as you. My name is Swift Eagle. Margaret's eyes widened. As she recognized the name from the soldiers' conversation, this was the dangerous warrior they had been discussing, the one who supposedly threatened the peace of the territory. But looking at him now, she saw intelligence and sadness more than danger. I'm Margaret O'Sullivan, she said, extending her hand in greeting. Swift Eagle looked at her outstretched hand for a moment, then gently shook it. His skin was warm and calloused from hard work. You are not afraid of me, Margaret O'Sullivan, should I be? Most of your people would say yes. But you are not like most of your people, I think. Before Margaret could respond, shouts came from the direction of the fort. Pete Collins was calling her name, his voice angry and worried. Swift Eagle stepped back toward his horse. Go back to safety, he told her. But remember that safety is not always what it appears to be. He mounted his horse and rode away just as Pete Collins and 2 soldiers came crashing through the trees. They found Margaret standing alone by the creek, her diary clutched to her chest and her mind full of questions about the mysterious warrior who had spoken to her like an equal, not like property to be bought and sold. Pete Collins was furious. His weathered face turned red as he grabbed Margaret's arm and pulled her away from the creek. What in blazes were you thinking, girl? There are hostile Indians all over these parts and you're out here picking flowers. Like you're in some Boston park. I wasn't picking flowers, Margaret protested, pulling free from his grip. I was just writing and thinking. I needed some quiet time. Quiet time will get you scalped, one of the soldiers said harshly. We saw tracks around here, fresh ones. It's probably Lakota scouts checking out the fort. Margaret said nothing about Swift Eagle, though she wasn't sure why. Something told her that mentioning their meeting would only make things worse, both for her and for him. Instead, she let Pete Collins escort her back to the fort. Listening to his lecture about frontier safety and proper behavior for ladies, that night, she lay awake on her hard bunk while the other women slept around her. She couldn't stop thinking about her conversation with Swift Eagle. There had been something in his eyes when he looked at her, a recognition that went beyond their brief meeting. He had seen her as a person, not just another piece of cargo being. Delivered to its destination the next morning, the wagon train was ready to move again. The repaired wheel looked sturdy enough, and Pete Collins was eager to reach Devil's Creek before sunset. Margaret climbed into her assigned wagon alongside. 3 other brides, Sarah, a quiet girl from Pennsylvania, Linda, a widow from Ohio, and Rebecca, a loud woman from New York who never stopped complaining about the journey. As they rolled away from Fort Laramie, Margaret watched the landscape change around them. The rolling hills gave way to rougher country with deep ravines and scattered rock formations. In the distance, she could see mountains rising like sleeping giants against the blue sky. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, so different from the tame countryside she had known back east, around midday. The wagon stopped at a small creek to rest the horses and let the women stretch their legs. Margaret walked a little, away from the group, careful not to go too far after yesterday's scolding. She was filling her water bottle from the stream when she heard a familiar voice behind her. You did not tell them about our meeting yesterday. She turned to find Swift Eagle standing in the shadow of a large boulder, his horse hidden behind the rocks. Her heart jumped, but she kept her voice steady. How do you know I didn't tell them? Because if you had, there would be soldiers searching for me right now, not just the usual patrol. He stepped closer, and she could see that he looked tired, as if he hadn't slept well either. Why did you protect me?
Margaret
Considered the question carefully. I suppose because I don't think you're the dangerous savage they make you out. To be, you could have hurt me yesterday, but you didn't. You warned me about being alone, and then left when you heard them coming. That doesn't sound like the behavior of someone who wants to harm innocent people. Swift Eagle was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. You are very trusting for someone traveling alone in hostile territory. Maybe I'm a good judge of character, Margaret replied. Or maybe I'm just tired of being told what to think, and who to fear. Your rancher husband, he is waiting for you in Devil's Creek. Margaret nodded, feeling a strange sadness at the mention of Harold Brennan. His name is Harold. We've never met, but we've exchanged letters. He seems practical. Practical. Swift Eagle repeated the word as if tasting something unpleasant. Is that what you want from life? To be practical? Before Margaret could answer, Rebecca's shrill voice cut through the air. Margaret, where are you? Pete says we're moving out in 5 minutes. Swift Eagle melted back into the shadows behind the boulder so quickly that Margaret almost wondered if she had imagined the whole conversation. She hurried back to the wagons, her mind spinning with questions she couldn't answer. The afternoon brought new challenges. The trail became steeper and more difficult, winding through narrow passes between towering rock walls. Pete Collins rode alongside the wagons with his rifle ready, his eyes constantly scanning the high ground above them. The other women sensed his nervousness and grew quiet. Huddling together in the wagon beds, Margaret found herself watching the cliffs and ridges, hoping for another glimpse of Swift Eagle. She told herself it was just curiosity, but her heart beat faster whenever she thought she saw movement on the distant rocks. There was something about the Lakota warrior that called to a part of her she had never known existed, a wild part that her proper Boston upbringing had tried to suppress. Late in the afternoon, they crested a hill and saw Devil's Creek spread. Out in the valley below, it was smaller than Margaret had expected, just a collection of wooden buildings arranged along a muddy main street. Beyond the town, she could see several ranch houses scattered across the grassland, smoke rising from their chimneys in the cool air. There she is, ladies, Pete Collins called out cheerfully. Devil's Creek, Wyoming territory? Your new home sweet home? The other women leaned forward to get their first look at their destination. Sarah gasped softly, and Margaret wasn't sure if it was from excitement or disappointment. Linda wiped tears from her eyes, while Rebecca immediately began complaining about how small and primitive everything looked. Margaret felt nothing but a growing sense of dread. Somewhere down in that valley was Harold Brennan, waiting to claim his mail-order bride. She would meet him tonight, marry him tomorrow, and spend the rest of her life trying to be the practical wife he wanted. The adventure would be over, and the real work of survival would begin. As the wagons rolled down the hill toward town, Margaret caught sight of a lone rider on a distant ridge. Even from far away, she recognized the silhouette of Swift Eagle. Watching their arrival, he sat perfectly still on his horse, like a statue carved from the landscape itself. Then, as she watched, he turned and disappeared over the ridge, taking with him all the questions and possibilities that had made her. Heart race. The wagons pulled up in front of Devil's Creek's only hotel, a 2-story building that looked like it had seen better days. A small crowd had gathered to welcome the brides, including several men who stepped forward to claim their future wives. Margaret saw Harold Brennan immediately, standing apart from the others with his hat in his hands and an awkward smile on his weathered face. He was older than she had expected, probably in his 40s, with graying hair and kind but tired eyes. He was clean and well-dressed, clearly prosperous, and he greeted her politely when Pete Collins made the introductions. Everything about him screamed safety and security, exactly what she had traveled 2,000 miles to find. So why did she feel like she was walking toward a prison instead of a new life? Harold Brennan stood nervously in front of the hotel, turning his hat over and over in his work-roughened hands. When Pete Collins introduced him to Margaret, he stepped forward with the careful politeness of a man who wasn't used to talking. "Two women. Miss O'Sullivan, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person," Harold said, his voice formal and stiff. "I hope the journey wasn't too difficult for you."
Great.
Grady curtsied slightly, the way her mother had taught her. "Mr. Brennan, thank you for your patience in waiting for me. The journey was long, but I'm grateful to be here safely." Harold was exactly as she had pictured him from his letters, practical and dependable, but lacking any spark of excitement or passion. He was tall and lean, with the sun-weathered skin of a man who spent his days outdoors. His clothes were clean and well-maintained, and she could tell he had made an effort to look his best for their meeting. "I've taken rooms for you and the other ladies at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house," Harold continued, gesturing toward a smaller building down the street. "I thought you might want to rest tonight and get settled. We can have the wedding ceremony tomorrow afternoon, if that suits you." Margaret nodded, though her stomach twisted at the word wedding. Tomorrow afternoon, she would become Mrs. Harold Brennan, and her life as Margaret O'Sullivan would be over forever. That sounds very reasonable, Mr. Brennan. But please call me Harold. We are to be married after all. He managed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Would you like to see the ranch before the ceremony? I could pick you up in my wagon around 10 o'clock in the morning. I would like that very much, Margaret replied, forcing enthusiasm into her voice. Harold helped her carry her bag to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, where she was given a small but clean room on the second floor. Mrs. Patterson, a round woman, with gray hair and a kind face, showed her where the washing facilities were and promised to have hot water ready for a bath. That evening, Margaret sat by her window looking out at the lights of Devil's Creek. The town was quiet except for the sounds coming from the saloon down the street, where men's voices mixed with tinny piano music. She tried to imagine herself living here for the rest of her life, raising children and growing old beside Harold Brennan. The thought should have comforted her. Harold seemed like a good man who would provide for her and treat her kindly. He would never beat her or abandon her the way some frontier husbands did. She would have a house, food on the table, and the security she had traveled so far to find. But when she closed her eyes, she didn't see Harold's face. Instead, she remembered Swift Eagle's dark eyes and the way he had spoken to her as an equal. She thought about his question. Was being practical enough for a whole lifetime? The next morning, Margaret dressed in her best dress, a green wool gown. That had belonged to her mother. She braided her hair carefully and pinned it up, trying to look like the proper ranch wife Harold expected. When she looked in the small mirror above the washstand, she hardly recognized herself. Harold arrived exactly at 10 o'clock, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 horses. He helped her up to the seat beside him, and they rode out of town toward his ranch. The morning was beautiful, with clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wild grass and sage. I have 800 acres, Harold told her as they drove, pride evident in his voice, about 200 head of cattle, plus horses and some chickens. The house has 4 rooms, including a kitchen with a real stove that I had shipped from Denver. There's a well with good water, and I've got 2 hired men who live in the bunkhouse. Margaret listened politely, trying to show interest in the details of her future home. Harold was clearly a successful rancher who had worked hard to build something solid and lasting. Any woman would be fortunate to marry him. The Brennan Ranch sat in a sheltered valley with a small stream running through it. The house was larger than Margaret had expected, built of logs and painted white, with a wide front porch and glass windows. Gardens of vegetables and flowers surrounded it, and she could see cattle grazing in the distant pastures. It's beautiful. Harold, she said honestly, you've built something wonderful here. Harold's face lit up with genuine pleasure. I'm glad you like it. I've been working on this place for 12 years, ever since I came out from Missouri. Always planned to have a family here someday, but it took me a while to figure out how to go about finding a wife. He showed her through the house, pointing out the modern conveniences he had installed: the cast-iron stove, the indoor pump for water, the large stone fireplace in the main room. Everything was clean and well-maintained, ready for a woman's touch to make it a true home. In the kitchen, Harold opened a wooden chest and pulled out a small velvet box. This was my mother's wedding ring, he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band. I'd be honored if you would wear it. Margaret stared at the ring, feeling the weight of the decision before her. Once she put it on, there would be no going back. She would be committed to this life, this man, this safe but passionless future. It's beautiful, she whispered, though she made no move to take it. Harold seemed to understand her hesitation. I know this isn't the way most people get married, he said gently. We don't know each other well yet, and I don't expect you to love me right away. But I think we could build a good life together, Margaret. I think we could learn to care for each other in time. Margaret looked into his honest eyes and saw nothing but kindness and hope. He was offering her everything she had said she wanted: security, respectability, a chance to build a future. So why did she feel like she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life? Before she could answer, they heard the sound of horses approaching the ranch house. Harold frowned and walked to the window. That's odd. I wasn't expecting anyone. Today, Margaret joined him at the window and felt her breath catch in her throat. 3 Lakota warriors sat on horseback in the ranch yard, but her eyes were drawn immediately to the one in the center. Swift Eagle looked magnificent in the morning. Sunlight, his long hair decorated with feathers and his paint horse stamping restlessly beneath him. "Stay back from the window," Harold said, reaching for his rifle. "I don't know what they want, but it can't be good." But Margaret couldn't stay back. She moved closer to the glass, drawn by something she couldn't name. Swift Eagle's eyes found hers through the window, and for a moment the rest of the world fell away. In his gaze she saw a challenge, possibility, and something that might have been a promise. Harold was speaking to her, but she could barely hear his words over the pounding of her heart. She knew with sudden and terrifying certainty that her life was about to change forever. The safe, practical future she had planned was crumbling before her eyes. She wasn't sure if she should fight to save it or let it fall. Harold gripped his rifle tighter as he watched the 3 Lakota warriors through the window. "Margaret, get away from there and go to the back bedroom. Lock the door and don't come out until I tell you it's safe." But Margaret couldn't move. Was mesmerized by the sight of Swift Eagle sitting tall on his painted horse, looking like he belonged to the very landscape around him. Even surrounded by the tension and danger of the moment, she felt drawn to him in a way that frightened and thrilled her. "Margaret!" Harold's sharp voice broke through her trance. "Did you hear me? Get to the back room now."
"Wait,"
she said softly, surprising herself. Maybe they just want to talk. "You don't need the rifle." Harold stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "Talk? These are hostile Indians, Margaret. They don't come calling for social visits. They're probably here to steal. Cattle or worse." Outside, Swift Eagle dismounted from his horse and walked slowly toward the front door. His movements were deliberate and non-threatening, his hands visible and empty of weapons. The other 2 warriors remained on horseback, watching but not moving closer. Margaret observed, "Look at him, Harold. It wanted to hurt us? Wouldn't he have his weapon ready?" Before Harold could respond, Swift Eagle's voice called out from the front porch. "Harold Brennan, I wish to speak with you." "I come in peace." Harold's eyes widened in surprise. "He knows my name, and he speaks English." He glanced at Margaret, confusion replacing some of his fear. "How does he know who I am?" Margaret felt her cheeks burn, knowing the answer but unable to admit it. Swift Eagle had been watching her, following the wagon train, learning about her destination and her intended husband. The knowledge should have frightened her, but instead, it sent a strange thrill through her heart. "Maybe you should see what he wants," she suggested quietly. Harold looked at her for a long moment, then walked to the door but didn't open it. "What do you want?" he called through the wood. "I want to speak with you about the woman," Swift Eagle replied, his voice calm and clear. "About Margaret O'Sullivan." Margaret's blood turned to ice. Art spun around to stare at her, his face a mixture of shock and growing anger. "How does he know your name? Margaret, what's going on here?" She opened her mouth to explain, but no words came. How could she tell Harold about her meetings with Swift Eagle without making it sound like something it wasn't? How could she explain that she had felt more alive in those brief conversations with a Lakota warrior than she had in all her proper years in Boston? Harold's expression darkened as he interpreted her silence. "You've met him before, haven't you? When?"
"At
Fort Laramie," Margaret whispered. "And yesterday, by the creek?" "But Harold, it wasn't what you think. We just talked." "Talked." Harold's voice rose. "You talked to a hostile Indian and didn't think to mention it to me? Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? How dangerous it still is?" Outside, Swift Eagle spoke again. "I mean no harm to either of you, but I must speak of important matters. The woman's life may depend on it." Harold looked from Margaret to the door and back again, his mind clearly racing. Finally, he made a decision. "Stay here," he told Margaret firmly. "Don't move from this spot." He walked to the door, his rifle still in his hands but pointed down. Slowly he opened it and stepped onto the porch. Margaret crept closer to the window where she could see and hear what happened next. Swift Eagle stood at the bottom of the porch steps, his posture respectful but confident. Strength in his bearing, He looked nothing like the savage monster the soldiers at Fort Laramie had described. "You are Harold Brennan," Swift Eagle said. "The woman Margaret is to be your wife." "That's right," Harold replied stiffly. "What business is that of yours?" "I believe she is in danger. There are things you do not know, things that could put her life at risk." Harold's grip tightened on his rifle. "What kind of danger? Are you threatening her?" "Not from me, Swift," Eagle said quickly. "From others, white men who mean her harm." "What are you talking about?" Harold demanded. Swift Eagle glanced toward the window where Margaret was listening, then back at Harold. "There are men in Devil's Creek who know she is educated, that she can read and write. They believe she has seen things, heard things that could cause them trouble. They plan to make sure she cannot speak of what she knows." Margaret felt cold dread creep up her spine. During the long journey west, she had indeed overheard conversations she probably shouldn't have heard. Discussions between wagon masters and drivers about illegal deals, about cheating Native Americans out of their land, about corruption involving government officials and army supplies. She had written some of these things in her diary, thinking them merely interesting observations about frontier life. Harold frowned, clearly confused. What could she possibly know that would threaten anyone? She just arrived yesterday. Has been traveling for months, listening, watching, writing everything down. Some men do not want their secrets recorded by someone who might someday speak to authorities back east. Harold looked back toward the house, his expression troubled. Margaret could see him beginning to understand that there was more to this situation than he had realized. "Even if what you're saying is true," Harold said slowly, "what do you expect me to do about it? Why should I trust you?" Swift Eagle was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because I care what happens to her. Because she has shown me kindness when others have shown only fear and hatred. Because she sees people as they truly are, not as others tell her they should be." Margaret's heart pounded as she heard the emotion in Swift Eagle's voice. There was something in his tone that spoke of deep feeling, of a connection that went beyond their brief meetings. Harold heard it too, and his face hardened with understanding. "You're in love with my fiancé," Harold said bluntly. Swift Eagle met his eyes directly. The simple admission hung in the air between them like a challenge. Margaret pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the courage it must have taken for Swift Eagle to speak such dangerous truth. Harold was quiet for a long time, processing this revelation. Finally, he spoke again, his voice tight with controlled anger. "And what about Margaret? Does she return your feelings?" Both men looked toward the window where Margaret stood. She knew they could see her there, knew they were waiting for her answer. The moment stretched endlessly as she struggled with the most important decision of her life. She could lie, claim that Swift Eagle meant nothing to her, and proceed with her marriage to Harold as planned. It would be the safe choice, the practical choice, the one that would give her the security she had traveled so far to find, or she could tell the truth and risk everything for the chance at something she had never dared to dream of. Something wild and passionate and completely uncertain. Margaret looked at Harold's weathered face, seeing the hurt and betrayal already forming in his eyes. Then she looked at Swift Eagle, seeing hope and fear and desperate love in his dark gaze. Her future hung in the balance, and she had to choose. Margaret's hands trembled as she stepped away from the window and walked slowly toward the front door. Each step felt like a lifetime, her heart hammering against her ribs as she approached the moment that would define the rest of her life. Harold and Swift Eagle both watched her emerge onto the porch, the morning sun casting long shadows across the wooden boards. "Margaret," Harold said quietly, his voice heavy with resignation, "tell me the truth. Do you love him?" She looked into Harold's kind eyes, seeing the pain there, and her heart broke for the hurt she was about to cause. He was a good man who deserved honesty, even if it would destroy the future he had carefully planned. "I barely know him," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've spoken only twice, for just a few minutes each time." Harold's expression flickered with hope, but Margaret wasn't finished. "But in those brief moments, I felt more alive than I have in my entire life. When he looks at me, he sees who I really am, not who I'm supposed to be." She took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry, Harold. You're a wonderful man, and you deserve someone who can love you completely. But I can't marry you knowing my heart belongs to someone else." Harold closed his eyes for a moment, his shoulders sagging with defeat. When he opened them again, there was sadness, but also a kind of relief. "I suppose I knew from the moment. I saw how you looked at him through the window. Man can tell when a woman's heart is elsewhere." Swift Eagle stepped forward, his voice urgent. "The danger I spoke of is real. There are men coming here, probably within the hour. They know Margaret. We'll be at this ranch today." Harold straightened, his protective instincts overriding his personal pain. "What men? What do they want?" "Pete Collins and 3 others. They've been selling army supplies to corrupt traders, cheating the government and the tribes." Margaret wrote about their conversations in her diary. "I want to make sure she can never testify against them." Margaret gasped, remembering the hushed conversations she had overheard during the journey. She had thought they were just typical frontier business dealings, but now she realized she had witnessed something much more serious. "They plan to make it look like an Indian raid," Swift Eagle continued. "Kill you both and burn the ranch. Blame will fall on my people, and their secrets will die with you." Harold's face went pale. "How do you know all this?" "'Cause they tried to hire me to do it. They offered horses and gold if I would attack your ranch today, while Margaret was here. When I refused, they decided to do it themselves and blame it on warriors from my band." Margaret felt sick. The men she had traveled with for months, who had seemed like protectors, were actually planning to murder her. The safe, civilized world she had known was revealing itself to be far more dangerous than the wilderness she had feared. "We have to get you away from here," Harold said, looking between Margaret and Swift Eagle. "Both of you. If they're coming here expecting to find you dead, then you need to disappear." "Come with me," Swift Eagle said to Margaret. "My people will protect you until this danger passes. We can send word to the authorities in Cheyenne about what these men have done." Margaret stared at him, understanding the magnitude of what he was offering. To go with Swift Eagle meant leaving behind everything she had ever known, entering a world completely foreign to her upbringing. It meant choosing love over security, passion over practicality, uncertainty over the safe life Harold represented. "If I go with you, there's no coming back," she said softly. "I'll never be able to return to the white world, will I?" Swift Eagle's expression grew solemn. "Probably not. My people are being pushed onto reservations. Our way of life is ending. If you come with me, you will share our struggles as well as our joys." Harold stepped between them, his face etched with concern. "Margaret, think carefully about what you're doing. You'd be giving up everything, your own people, your family back east. And for what? A life on the run, constantly hiding from the army and the government." Margaret looked at both men, seeing the care and concern in their faces. Harold was offering her one last chance to reconsider, to choose the safe path even after she had broken his heart. Swift Eagle was being completely honest about the hardships she would face if she chose to follow him. In the distance, she could hear the sound of approaching horses. Pete Collins and his men were coming, just as Swift Eagle had warned. Decision. Time had arrived whether she was ready or not. "I can't live a lie," she said finally, looking at Harold with tears in her eyes. "I'm grateful for everything you offered me, but I can't pretend to be someone I'm not. I need to be free to make my own choices, even if they're dangerous ones." Harold nodded slowly, understanding in his gaze. "Then you better go, both of you. I'll tell them you've never arrived, that something must have happened on the trail that might buy you some time." Swift Eagle moved quickly toward his horse, but Margaret caught Harold's arm before he could turn away. "What about you? Won't they suspect you're lying?" Harold managed a sad smile. "I've been dealing with dangerous men longer than you might think. I can handle Pete Collins and his friends. Besides, they need this story to be believable. A grieving bridegroom whose wife disappeared makes more sense than a dead rancher." The sound of horses was getting closer. Swift Eagle mounted his painted horse and extended his hand toward Margaret. "We must go now. We're almost here." Margaret looked one last time at the ranch house, at the safe life she was abandoning. Then she looked at Harold, seeing understanding and even a kind of blessing in his weathered face. "Be happy, Margaret," he said softly. "Be free." She took Swift Eagle's hand, and let him pull her up behind him on his horse. As they rode away from the ranch, she wrapped her arms around his strong waist and felt the thrill of absolute freedom, mixed with absolute terror. Behind them, she could hear Pete Collins and his men arriving at the ranch, their voices angry and confused as they found only Harold waiting for them. But ahead lay the unknown wilderness. And beside her rode the man who had seen her true heart from the very beginning, for the first time in her life. Margaret O'Sullivan was exactly where she chose to be, regardless of the consequences. The practical, a young woman from Boston, was gone forever, replaced by someone willing to risk everything for love and freedom, as Swift Eagle's horse carried them toward the distant mountains. Margaret closed her eyes and let herself imagine the life that lay ahead, uncertain but entirely her own. Margaret's journey 6 months later, Margaret sat beside a small fire in the hidden valley that Swift Eagle's band called home. The autumn air was crisp, and she pulled her buffalo robe closer as she watched children playing near the stream. She hardly recognized the woman she had become. Her auburn hair hung in two, long braids decorated with beads from Swift Eagle's sister, Singing Bird. Her pale skin had bronzed from months under open sky, and her hands were calloused from survival. Work. The soft woman who had stepped off that wagon train in Devil's Creek was gone, placed by someone stronger and more self-reliant than she had ever imagined. "You are thinking of your old life again," Swift Eagle observed, settling beside her, with easy grace. Even after all these months together, her heart still quickened when he was near. "Sometimes," Margaret admitted, leaning against his shoulder, "I wonder what happened to Harold, whether he's safe. And I think about my family back in Boston, whether they even know I'm alive." Swift Eagle was quiet, understanding her conflicted feelings. Life with the Lakota had been harder than anything she had experienced, but it had also been filled with richness and authenticity she had never known existed. "Harold Brennan as well," Swift Eagle said softly. "My scouts brought word. He told authorities about Pete Collins and the others. They were arrested and sent to prison for stealing army supplies. Harold kept your name out of the reports." Margaret felt gratitude toward the man she had almost married. Even after she had broken his heart, he had protected her reputation. "A good man," she said quietly. "Yes, and he deserves to find love with someone who can give him her whole heart." Margaret looked at Swift Eagle, seeing wisdom and pain in his dark eyes. These months had been difficult for him too. His people faced an uncertain future as the government forced more tribes onto reservations. Every day brought news of another band surrendering, another piece of their homeland lost forever. "What will happen to us?" she asked, voicing the question that haunted them both. Swift Eagle took her hands, his touch warm despite calluses earned from constant vigilance. "I don't know," he said honestly. "The soldiers are closing in. Soon we may have to choose between surrender and exile to the north, to the land of the grandmother queen." Margaret knew he meant Canada, where some Lakota bands had fled to escape. The reservation system would mean leaving the United States forever, becoming permanent exiles. "Would you regret it?" Swift Eagle asked quietly. "If we had to leave everything behind and start over in a foreign land, would you regret choosing this life?" Margaret considered carefully. The months with Swift Eagle's band had been the hardest of her life, filled with cold nights, hungry days, and constant fear of army discovery. She had learned to tan hides, gather medicinal plants, and help with endless survival tasks that never existed in her comfortable Boston life, but she had also learned what it meant to be truly free, to make choices based on love rather than fear, to be part of a community that valued courage and wisdom over wealth and social status. She had found strength within herself she never knew existed. "No," she said firmly. "I would never regret choosing love over security, choosing you over the safe path. These have been the most real months of my life." Swift Eagle smiled, transforming his usually serious face. "Then we will face whatever comes together. Whether it is the reservation, exile, or something else entirely." As if summoned by their conversation, Singing Bird approached with news that would change everything. Swift Eagle's sister was a strong, intelligent woman who had become Margaret's closest friend and teacher in Lakota ways. "Brother," Singing Bird said in Lakota, which Margaret now understood well, "riders are coming." White men with a flag of truce. Swift Eagle rose immediately, hand moving toward his weapon. Margaret felt familiar fear. Every time white men appeared, it meant potential danger for her adopted family. How many? Swift Eagle asked. 3. One looks like an army officer, but they carry only sidearms. They say they wish to speak with you about the woman. Margaret's blood went cold. After months of hiding, had someone finally tracked her down? Swift Eagle looked at her with concern. You should go to the women's lodge. If there is trouble, you will be safer there. But Margaret stood up, surprising herself with her determination. No. If this concerns me, then I need to be part of it. I'm not the frightened mail-order bride who ran away 6 months ago. Member of this band, and I have the right to face whatever's coming. Swift Eagle studied her face, then nodded with pride. Very well, we face this together. They walked through camp toward where 3 white men waited at the valley's edge. Margaret recognized the army uniform, but her attention was drawn to the civilian beside him, an older man with kind eyes who seemed familiar as they drew closer. The civilian stepped forward and removed his hat. Miss O'Sullivan? My name is Samuel Mitchell. I'm a federal marshal, and I've been looking for you for quite some time. Margaret felt Swift Eagle tense, ready to defend her. What do you want with me? She asked, keeping her voice steady. Marshal Mitchell smiled gently. To thank you, primarily. The information you recorded in your diary, combined with Harold Brennan's testimony, helped us uncover a corruption ring that went all the way to Washington. Pete Collins and his associates were selling army supplies and pocketing government money meant for tribal relations. Your observations were crucial evidence. Margaret stared in shock. My diary, but I lost it during our escape. Harold Brennan saved it when Collins searched the ranch. He kept it safe and turned it over to proper authorities. Your detailed accounts provided exactly the evidence we needed. The army officer stepped forward. Miss O'Sullivan, you've performed a valuable service. Corruption you helped expose was causing real harm to both settlers and Indian tribes. Because of you, we've made arrests and begun reforming the supply system. Margaret looked at Swift Eagle, seeing surprise and growing hope. What does this mean? Marshal Mitchell glanced at Swift Eagle with respect. It means certain accusations against this band have been proven false. The army will not be pursuing you for any alleged raids. In fact, we'd like to offer your people a different arrangement than the standard reservation system. Swift Eagle stepped forward, voice carefully controlled. What kind of arrangement? The officer consulted his document. A permanent settlement in the Black Hills region with guaranteed hunting and fishing rights. Federal protection for your traditional way of life, and the right to govern yourselves according to your own laws. It's not perfect, but it's far better than what most tribes are being offered. Margaret felt tears spring to her eyes, realizing what this meant. Swift Eagle's people wouldn't have to choose between surrender and exile. There is one condition, Marshal Mitchell added. Miss O'Sullivan, your testimony may be needed in Washington for the corruption trials. Would you be willing to travel east to speak before a federal court? Margaret looked around at the people who had become her family, then at the man who had won her heart. If I go back east, will I be allowed to return here afterward? Marshal Mitchell nodded. You'll be traveling as a federal witness under government protection. Your safety will be guaranteed, and yes, you'll be free to return to your chosen home. Swift Eagle took her hand, squeezing gently. The choice is yours. Whatever you decide, I will support. Margaret looked over the valley that had become her home, at the people who had accepted her as one of their own. 6 months ago, she had been a mail-order bride with no control over her destiny. Now she was being asked to help shape the future for an entire people. I'll do it, she said firmly. I'll go to Washington and tell them everything I know. I'll be coming back here, to my real home, to my real family. Swift Eagle smiled, the expression full of love and pride. Then we will wait for you, however long it takes. Margaret realized her journey was far from over. She had traveled 2,000 miles as a bride, but had found something much more valuable than a husband. She had found herself, her voice, and her place in the world. The practical young woman from Boston who had sought only security was gone forever. In her place stood someone who understood that true freedom meant having the courage to fight for what was right, even when it meant risking everything. Margaret O'Sullivan had indeed traveled far from home, but she had finally arrived exactly where she belonged.